Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. It's Datley. In today's video, I have Michael Rosmer from Offshore Citizen. We gotta sit down and talk a lot about different things regarding tax strategy, citizenship, residencies from different countries. It's a really interesting conversation and super cool if you're an entrepreneur, anyone that's interested in learning more about that. Enjoy. Okay, Michael, and we're good. Thank you for coming on. You
Thanks
good?
for having me. Super excited to join you here. Yeah,
Yeah,
100%. How about yourself?
I'm good, man. It's a nice early day in Vancouver. It's actually been raining all week, but I got a nice break today. Whereabouts are you?
I am in Sofia, Bulgaria today. I was just in Dubai for the last about week, and yeah, so I'm here, and they are apparently locking things down starting tonight. So I may end up being stuck here for another month or so. We'll see.
And is that where you're living primarily right now? Your permanent residence?
Yeah, so I have residency here, and my wife and I came here, I don't know, like 2.5 years ago or something. But for the last couple of years, we were traveling most of the year. It was all good. It was just kind of like where we could easily have our things and be based out of. But then, Corona came along, and that was not so good. So yeah, this year we haven't been many places. Let's see. We've been to Hungary, France, Italy, Serbia, Montenegro, UAE. That's it. So this is like a really slow year for us. But anyway, hopefully next year will be much more open, and we'll be able to be a little bit more aggressive in our travels. I was hoping to do like 15 new countries this year, but no such luck. Zero new countries for the year.
Yeah, COVID has pretty much stopped all travel from. It's pretty much crippled the whole tourism industry everywhere.
It's terrible. It's terrible. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I believe so much in seeing different parts of the world. And I actually just had a friend move here from Canada this past week. And I was just observing how much I value being somebody who's worldly. Like, I have friends in so many different parts of the world, been to so many places, have so much different experience of different cultures. And I feel as though in our lives, first of all, our life experience is just richer, having tried different things, done different things. But on top of that, we as people grow, and then I think it helps us to connect with others and kind of just collectively for society. It's a really good thing when we've all kind of been different places, tried different things, etc. And yeah, this is like a very isolationist drive, so it's very counter to what I would like to see. But anyway, such is life.
Yeah, and a lot of entrepreneurs, one of their big checkmark things that when they make the leap from being like an employee to being an entrepreneur is the ability to travel. And a lot of the people I
Yeah,
know in terms of working online, that's kind of like one of their most desirable aspects of being an entrepreneur, that they can just pick up their laptop, go to any coffee shop in the world and just do business as usual. And no one really expected
100%.
or foresaw like just not being able to travel anywhere. And it's weird because it feels like part of your rights are taken away when you can't even go
Yeah.
anywhere.
Absolutely. Yeah, my wife was mentioning, she's like, if somebody had told you a year ago that this would happen, you wouldn't have believed them. You'd be like, the entire world locked down. Come on, no way that's going to happen. Now, it's like, yeah.
And
So,
I've
yeah,
been
not
checking
not
out
good at
your
all. It's one of the things. I don't know.
go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say that I was just
I was just
watching a
going to say,
bunch
have
of
you
your.
read much of Tim Ferriss's stuff?
Yeah, all of them actually. I actually have the whole series up here.
Nice, nice. Well, I remember him talking about, automating income, basically time freedom, money freedom and location freedom. And back when I started entrepreneurship, I thought time freedom was this huge deal. And I was fairly fortunate to do a pretty good job of that by when I got to about 28. And I learned that actually I much prefer time freedom is not that important in the grand scheme compared to location freedom. If I had to choose between location freedom and time freedom, I'll take location freedom like every day of the week, just because like you're going to do something with your time. So long as you're doing something that matters to you, then who cares whether you don't have a ton of extra time because you're doing something that matters to you. But to be able to go different places, that's just yeah, it's such a huge deal. So I it definitely irks me a little bit to have the restrictions that we have here. But oh well. You were mentioning something though about checking something out.
Yeah, so I was checking out your YouTube channel. Offshore
Thank
Citizen,
you.
and you've just been
Yep.
pumping out like so many videos. I watched your latest one today on PayPal and crypto,
Yep.
and I was
Yep.
just like, it reminded me of in 2017 when everyone was just super bullish. I remember John McAfee's like, it's gonna go to 50K like
Yeah.
next year by 2020, and 2020 is here, and it's just interesting to look back and see kind
Yeah.
of the fluctuations and the changes just within like crypto
Yeah.
itself.
Do you do anything with crypto?
You know, I've bought some and I just held it, to be honest. I find like
Nice.
trading it and whatnot
What
is just too.
what are you holding?
I have some a little bit of Bitcoin. I have some
Yep.
Litecoin, and a few other
Yeah.
like small altcoins, and some Ripple.
Okay.
Some Ripple, yeah.
Okay. Ripple had just like such a crazy pump there, both, a few years back. Actually, a friend of mine did really well. I think he bought in like the low point at like 18 cents, then it went up to $3 or something. Did fantastic job. But just the other day, I don't know if you were following it, but a few days ago, Ripple pumped like, I don't know, 100% in a day or something like that, which was, the first real craziness lately. So I don't know. We're going to see it. It's going pretty aggressively upward here. We got a lot of money coming into crypto right now, so it may be maybe an exciting 2021.
Like outside of, I guess, like the big countries, are a lot of other countries getting exposed to it at the moment? Like the smaller countries, like
Well, I mean, crypto is not a big thing transactionally in most parts of the world, right? Like, obviously, if you go to places like Argentina, where they've had massive devaluations of their currency, they have a different sort of appreciation for something like Bitcoin than, some of these other places. I think if you talk to most of the people who are pretty big on it, they've all kind of given up the idea that Bitcoin will be kind of the replacement for money. That story is mostly gone just based on the complexities of the technology, the transaction fees being high, the transaction speed not being especially high, the network not being able to handle so much volume. There's some ideas of the Lightning Network and things like this, but the new story that people are telling, the narrative is it's not so much the new money, it's the new gold, right? And whether you believe that or not, I tend to think that it's dramatically different in some ways that are kind of meaningful. And so I don't think it's actually a very good analogy, but that's kind of the thesis that's pushing a lot of long-term buying and holding of it. And you're seeing now, I mean, Paul Tudor Jones, very, very famous trader, has bought Bitcoin. Stanley Druckenmiller, one of the greatest investors of all time, bought Bitcoin recently. Obviously, PayPal's opened up to allowing people to custody it. In Germany, the banks were allowed now to custody crypto. Kraken, one of the big exchanges, got a banking license in the U.S. I think there's another one that's getting it. Coinbase going public. Square is fairly big on Bitcoin. Like you're running down, you're seeing quite a bit of momentum in terms of mainstream acceptance and adoption of it among other different forces. So I think the story that there's a lot of money coming into Bitcoin right now is quite true. And I don't know if you followed it all, but the DeFi wave kind of in the summer, especially kind of August, was pretty nuts. I mean, if you followed Aave, their token Lend, if you'd bought it September 2019 and held to September 2020, that was a 200x return, which is just ridiculous, right? Like just totally insane. And lots of 10x's in there and things like that. The DeFi space is super exciting. I personally, I'm not like there's some people who are like Bitcoin maximalists. I'm not a Bitcoin maximalist by any stretch, but I think that the pace of innovation that's happening within DeFi, and as a result, kind of where they can go with it, is really, really cool. And I feel like they're kind of getting to the point. For a long time, it's been pretty useless, but they're finally getting to the stage where they actually have some useful products. And so I'm pretty bullish about it and pretty excited about what could happen over the next, I don't know, 12 months or something like that. So we'll see.
I wanted to ask you, what's the difference between residency and having like, I guess like a second citizenship?
Yeah, great question. Okay, so residency, there's actually two types of residency, so we kind of have to separate these out. There's tax residency, there's legal residency, and then there's, as you're mentioning, citizenship. So tax residency is basically you're liable for tax in that place. Residency, as people are normally talking about it, like going for it, is you have the right to live in that country. Okay, so for instance, I have residency here in Bulgaria, but I have Canadian citizenship. So citizenship is where your passport is. So when you're a citizen of some place, you get all the rights there. You can work there, you can vote there, you have access to all their social services, etc. When you get residency, you can't vote, you can't get the passport, and often you can't, just depending on your residency, but maybe with certain residency permits, you would be allowed to work, and you may or may not be able to access kind of their public services. So usually, like residency is a path to citizenship. If you live in a country for 5 years, typically, I mean, it varies from, in the lowest cases, there's countries that accept it in 2 years, and there's some that it takes 20 years, right? So there's kind of the gamut, but in the 5 to 10 range is really, really normal for how long you would live there in order to become a citizen. And so if you want to expand your visa-free travel, then you need a citizenship. You can't get that from residency, unless there's a couple exceptions to that, but more or less that's the case. If you want to, have it so that you can't ever be kicked out or can't ever lose it, you need the citizenship. So both are valuable. Usually you get residency first, but if people are thinking about plan Bs or increasing their freedom, et cetera, then citizenship is also pretty important. And I think it's a great thing if somebody can get multiple citizenships. Most of the time, that's a nice benefit that you can enjoy. Do you have multiple citizenships, or what's your story?
I immigrated with my family in 1990, and I became a
Yep.
citizen of Canada in 1993. But that's all I have. I gave up my rights in Vietnam. So only one passport.
Is there any? Okay. I mean, obviously, it's not like a really strong second passport, but yeah, if you could have had a second one, I mean, it's always nice to have extra options, especially in a world like the thing that I kind of tell people a lot today is the world's just so uncertain, right? You just have no idea what it's going to be like in, I don't know, 5 years. Well, heck, like next year it could be totally different, but 5 years, 10 years. So if you can get extra options, then that's a pretty good thing. It also can affect sometimes where you end up having to pay tax and things like this. So yeah, it's like part of an overall strategy if you, I don't know, want to increase your freedom and potentially keep more of the money that you make.
Well, what's the best places if, let's just say, like if someone has like a business and they want to optimize their taxes so they don't have to pay that much or whatnot, or what are some of the best places to go?
It's a great question. Yeah, so it depends. Okay, so this is the way that it works, is that you're taxable based on your residency. The business is taxable based on its residency and where the income is earned, which is a whole other kind of complexity to it. And so theoretically, if you're able to, you want to, of course, have zero personal tax and zero business tax. There's not a ton of places that offer both. You can, so UAE would be a simple example. If you're a resident of UAE, and not everybody, if you're an American, you're taxed on your citizenship, so it doesn't really matter where you go. But if you're not an American, then in theory, just from a pure tax standpoint, UAE is about as good as it gets. There's a bunch of others, there's these islands, Bahamas and Cayman Islands and stuff like that, but probably people wouldn't want to live there. They're more likely to end up, just like who wants to live on a tiny little island for their whole life sort of thing, Of course you can travel, but that's, and then there's some other places where you can get some pretty good treatment. Like I'm a fan of Malaysia. Malaysia, you could more or less end up with 3% tax. That's pretty good. There's some regimes, like in Portugal, there's something called the non-habitual residency program, where for 10 years you can get favorable tax treatment in certain ways. You have to kind of structure yourself properly, but potentially it could be as low as 0% tax in Portugal. So that's pretty good. People like Panama, like Chile. Chile has like a 3-year exemption. So it really depends on the person's business, though, because, for instance, let's say you're doing like Amazon business, or you're drop shipping or something like that. Well, if you have your Shopify store, you need payment processing. You're probably not going to have very good payment processing options in UAE, right?
Right.
So as a result, you probably need to have something based in Europe or the US or something like that. And it can make a big difference in the business. So for instance, if you process payments with like say your clients are in the US, but you have a non-US payment processor, you could have a 10% decline rate because US cards are declining foreign transactions based on fraud, right? And that could hurt you quite a bit. In theory, that loss of revenue could add up to, as much as your tax would be in some places, right? So whenever you're kind of figuring out, all right, where do you go? How do you set up? You want to pay attention to, well, what's the nature of your business? Where are your staff? Where are your customers? Where do you actually want to live? Because who cares about making a ton of money if you live in a place you hate, right? That's not really a great way to go. And yeah, so it can be all different ways.
I heard the most popular places for some like online entrepreneurs for Canadians is Panama, and then for U.S. citizens it's Puerto Rico. It's kind of like what
Yeah,
I'm hearing.
so if if you're an American, Puerto Rico is like the gold standard, and the reason for that is Americans are taxed based on their citizenship, not their residency. So if you're an American, you move abroad, it really doesn't benefit you much, except for the fact that you can claim something called the foreign earned income exclusion, where you get it's like $107,000 a year tax free. But aside from that, you're paying U.S. taxes at full rate. So if you're making half a million, a million, 2 million a year, then your taxes can add up to be quite a lot. But Puerto Rico is the one exception to that. Puerto Rico is a U.S. territory, and they have a special deal with the IRS that you don't have to apply U.S. Basically, if you're a resident of Puerto Rico, then you're not a U.S. tax resident. You're just a Portuguese or a Puerto Rican resident, and so you can potentially get like about 4% tax, depending on the nature of your business and stuff there. So that's really fantastic. For Canadians, it's much more diverse. Panama, my experience is, Panama is an easy place to get residency, and so sometimes people go. There's something called the Friendly Nations Visa Program there, and yeah, you can kind of get away with low tax. But nobody seems to really, I don't want to say nobody, but almost nobody seems to like living there. So they end up leaving after a while. I have, maybe like 2 clients who actually have decided to stay and live in Panama. Everybody else like goes there. They think it sounds like a good idea. And after a while, they're like, this is lame. I'm leaving. And they go somewhere else. So yeah, there's a bit of a trade-off in terms of what it is that people actually want to end up doing.
So you like if you want to like save on the taxes, you need to live there like full time. Is that right?
Not necessarily. So let's talk about Canada as a specific example, since you're in Canada. Okay, so the way that it works in Canada is if you're a Canadian tax resident, then your personal income is subject to Canadian income tax. Your business income isn't necessarily. So, if you're in the small business tax rate in Canada, your taxes are pretty favorable anyway, right? You can get like 11% or so, depending on the province that you live in. So that's not too crazy, up to $500,000 Canadian dollars. When you go over that, now you're talking about like 27%, et cetera. So it starts to become much more punitive. And so theoretically, what you could do is you would set up a foreign company somewhere abroad where it would be, very low or zero tax. And your business would be run from there, but you could potentially live in Canada. Now, there's lots of technicalities to the rules because, it's not, if it was so easy as just forming a company in British Virgin Islands, everybody would do it, right? And the CRA would be out of business. So they have all kinds of rules set up to try and control and make sure that you don't falsely shift your business there. But theoretically, if you have the right type of business and you can set it up right, which is kind of like what we'll help people with, then what you can do is you could set up a company, some pays zero tax, the company could pay no tax. And there's a set of rules called the exempt surplus rules where you can bring money back to your Canadian company tax-free then. So you basically can cut out the corporate tax portion of it, and then you'll still pay on the personal side. There are some things you can do to optimize the personal side as well, but it gets more complicated. So bottom line is, okay, you can cut out the corporate tax, you're left just with the personal. That gives you some advantage. But if you want to like completely be zero tax, then yeah, you'd have to give up your Canadian residency. So there's some technicalities around, how that works and what's involved there. You don't theoretically need to go and live somewhere else full time. You can still spend some time in Canada, but you couldn't be considered Canadian tax resident. That's the important part. And of course, you'd have to be not tax resident somewhere else that has, similar taxes or worse taxes, of which there are some. So.
Yeah, it'd be just in my case. It's like, man, my parents spent their whole lives trying to get here, and then I'm like, I just get into business, and you know what I mean? I just give it up. So like that part of it is
I
just
know,
interesting.
and I've talked to a few people about that. It's a similar thing. Yeah, absolutely. But you know what? Like, I think the world is changing, right? Like, one of the things that kind of fascinates me is just how I think that people don't really appreciate how much the world has changed in the last 10 years in particular. Like, how much you can work from anywhere, how much you can learn online on YouTube instead of going to a college or university, things like this. And in that environment, I think one of the things we're going to see more and more over the next 10 years is, first of all, businesses are going to choose to employ people where it makes the most sense. And the recipients of that are going to be like Eastern Europe and Asia, probably primarily, maybe a little bit Latin America. The recipients of that will not be the Western countries, right? Canada, the US, Germany, UK, France, etc. These are all going to be terrible places to employ people because they have really high cost of labor and they have high socials. And so that's going to negatively affect those labor markets. At the same time, when you're somebody who's doing pretty well and you're making money online, then why would you stay somewhere where they're going to tax you really heavily if you're not getting something from it? I think what happened historically was that the quality of life was a lot better in the US, in Canada, in UK, and Australia, and places like this. And so people kind of rationalize, right? They're like, okay, well, it's safer, infrastructure is there, you have good health care, you have this. But increasingly, that's not the case. Like, if you just consider, say, Malaysia as an example, I mean, Kuala Lumpur in 1999 compared to Kuala Lumpur today is night and day difference, right? I mean, you're talking about like a world-class city today that offers, in many regards, far more than you would get in some place like Canada at, a fraction of the cost, and potentially, like I said, with like 3% taxes. Same thing with some place like Dubai. You can look at what was UAE or what was Dubai 30 years ago. It was like nothing, right? Today, I mean, you have one of the leading cities in the world, 3.3 million people. It's one of the most ethnically diverse places in the world. You've got just so much in terms of conveniences, in terms of types of food, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And you start to say, well, hang on a minute. The weather's better in some of these places. It's cheaper in some, it's not in UAE, but in some of these, say, Asian countries, it is. My taxes are super low. My cost to hire people is super low. Like, why don't I just base myself out of there and then spend some of the time in a place like Canada or the US or Australia or whatever, as opposed to doing it the other way around? And I think you're going to see a big trend in that regard because people just have the freedom that they didn't have in the past. And countries will more and more have to compete for you if they want to retain you. And we're seeing this right now with Southern Europe. Like, Greece has been a disaster, of course, since like, I don't know, 2008 or whatever. And now they're starting to bring in these programs to try and attract rich people and investors. They've got a flat tax that for very high income earners so that they can cap, or location independent workers can get half of their taxes eliminated. There's a thing for pensioners now where they can get 7% tax, on and on and on, because they realize that their country's collapsing and they have to attract people who are going to be productive and add to the society. And, why would those people come there when to be in Greece, they tax you to death, they do everything's bureaucratic, they do a horrible job of it, et cetera. So yeah, it's going to be a really interesting way the world changes over the next, like I said, maybe 10 years or so.
I would say like a lot of people don't even know how modern a lot of these like countries are. Like even
Yeah.
if you haven't been to
Yeah.
Thailand, like you kind of think, oh, it's a third world country, whatnot. But you go to some like in Bangkok, some of these buildings and malls are like way nicer than like downtown
Way better.
Vancouver. It's
Way better. Absolutely. I mean, Bangkok's a really funny example, right? Because I find Bangkok is this maelstrom of the nicest things and just total dump as well. So you can walk on the street and it just stinks, and it's, you feel like you're inhaling just pollution. But then you'll step into like Paragon Mall or something like that. I mean, in Terminal Mall, they have heated toilet seats in their public toilets. Like, what are we talking about here? This is ridiculous. Like, I remember the first time I was in Thailand, I was there with my brothers, and we decided to go see a movie. We're like, okay, great, go see a movie. And so we buy a ticket, and we're walking towards the place where you go to the theater. And we're thinking, and this girl comes running up behind us, and we're thinking, she probably wants to see our tickets because nobody's checked our tickets. She's like, "Sir, I'm so sorry. Your tickets come with complimentary refreshments, but I haven't had a chance to show you the menu yet. Would you like to come with me?" We're like, this is great. Sure. We didn't know about this. And they bring us into like this beautiful lounge. It's like marble. They bring us this menu. It's like you have beer and popcorn, almonds and wine, tea and biscuits, coffee and whatever. So we're sitting there eating this. We're like, man, this is way better than Canada. This is great. And this person comes up, they're like, sir, I'm so sorry. Your tickets come with a complimentary massage, but all the massage people have left. Here's a coupon. Come back anytime for your free massage. We're like, well, this just keeps getting better and better. What the heck's going on here? This is great. Then we walked into the actual cinema, and like in Canada, there's actually a reason why they have the typical number is 299 seats that you can have maximum in these places, and there's some regulation reasons for that. Here, there's 16 giant leather, better than what you have in any of your home cinemas, electronically reclining lazy boys with pillows and blankets and a button to call an attendant to come if you need anything. And we're just like, I don't want to ever go see a movie in Canada again. I want to come to Thailand to watch my movies. And all of this for, comparable price to what you're paying in Canada. Like, why would I do that? Where's the comparison? So yeah, they do an awesome job. And yeah, like you said, I don't think that people really appreciate just how good some of these countries are. And I mean, there's trade-offs too, right? It's not to say that it's all perfect, but there's just places that offer a ton. And increasingly, like, to me, I guess the thing is that I look a lot at the trajectory of countries and kind of the pace of innovation. And I feel like in North America, they're sitting there arguing about gender neutral bathrooms. And in Asia, they're busy figuring out how to make their society way better. Like I don't remember if it was Cambodia or something, but I was in an airport and I went to the toilet, and you close the door, and on the stall door is this little description. It says, hey, here's the person who's responsible for your stall. If there's any problems here, please send a WhatsApp message with pictures to this phone number here, and we'll have someone come and fix it right away. And you're like, why don't we have stuff like that in Canada? Like, I thought we're supposed to be leading, and I just don't see the signs that places in the West are working on improving like that. I think that they're just busy fighting about stupid stuff. And meanwhile, these other countries, their pace of growth and their pace of improvement is just blows everything that we've got away. Elon Musk makes some comment about this, about how when he's driving to work, he'll look at the skyline and he's like, oh, skyline's the same. That's not good. And you would never feel that if you're in Dubai, if you're in Shanghai, if you're in Kuala Lumpur, it's just construction everywhere. There's all sorts of cool new towers going up. I mean, the number of, the tallest buildings in the world now that are in Dubai is crazy. The number that are in, or biggest malls that are in Asia and UAE, and good malls, amazing places. It's just, what was the last one they built in North America? I mean, they had Mall of America was built maybe, oh boy, probably 30 years ago or something, West Edmonton Mall, almost 40 years ago now. And what are they building since then? I just don't see that they're building this really cool, massively impressive, great push the limit stuff. So yeah, it's competition will beat them out over time.
I also think that here we sometimes have too much freedoms, and everyone gets too much of an opinion on things, where it's just super liberal, and people don't even understand a lot of things.
I feel like they're, yeah, I feel like, yeah, I mean, obviously, I think that people are kind of entitled. It's they feel as though, oh, we're great and things are good. It's almost like it's been too comfortable for too long, and people who have come from positions where they're worse off, have this real drive to make them better. And I just don't see that so much in these places. People are just kind of fat and happy, so to speak.
I think also adoption to the new tech society, right? Like you said earlier, people are learning just from YouTube. There's no barrier to education or information.
Yep. Yep. Totally.
You got so many things on low cost platforms too, like Udemy, that people can learn from. So many VAs that we hire from the Philippines, they're super more educated than some of the people I know here, and more competent, and they're
totally
super affordable.
100%, 100%. My wife is from Montenegro, and she went to school in Belgrade, so she hires Serbians for us quite a bit. And yeah, like we're getting people with master's degrees who are like really smart, super wonderful, hardworking. We love them. They're like on top of it people, and it costs a lot less than it would cost in North America. I'm like, these are great people. Like I just it's just a different culture, a different space, and yeah, people are just not like pushing the same in North America and a lot of these things anymore. And I think that it's over time going to work against us.
What do you think is the biggest factor? Do you think it has something to do with schooling or just lifestyle expectations or?
It's a very good question. Yeah, I mean, I'd love to hear what your position is. I attribute it to some extent to almost just like culture, and I just feel as though the values that we're reinforcing today are not like, it's kind of like one of the things that I dislike quite a bit in various parts of Canada is, as an entrepreneur, I almost feel like I'm the enemy, I'm the criminal. Like there's this kind of wave of socialism, this idea that it's against rich people or something. And like, what a horrible incentive. Like here's a simple example. I will talk to people about the idea that you should be able to get rich being in government. And people are terribly against this. It's almost like this would be a horrible thing, that's heaven forbid that somebody could get rich. And I'm like, well, let's see. You have an enormous budget. I mean, it's like what, $300 billion or something in Canada, annual budget, maybe quite a bit more than that. I don't remember. If somebody can reduce the cost of health care by $500 million, I have no problems with them making $50 million for that. Like, I think that's a great thing. And why wouldn't you want to reward people for adding value? But instead, there's this culture of like, well, people are priceless and every life matters and all this. And of course, in some sense, that's true. But there's this disconnect from that. And I mean, look, there are some really messed up things going on that kind of, I think, fuel that. I think that you have a lot of corporatism. I think you have a system which has built kind of some really dysfunctional incentive structures, et cetera. But the mindset that has been conditioned into people is not one that really values productivity. It's not one that really values, like, I think about it kind of like consumption versus creation. And I think you're kind of like an animal if you're a consumer. Of course, everybody's going to consume, and that's cool. But I think, you should aspire to be creating. And, whether that means you're, writing a great book, or whether that means that you're building new technology, or whether that means that you're, I don't know, doing some sort of architecture or whatever, like, hopefully you're trying to put something out into the world that's going to extend beyond yourself. And then hopefully you do that in such a way that you can get rewarded for it. And yeah, it's really interesting. And maybe one of the other things too that I've really noticed lately is a lot of people seem to not have a belief in their like personal ability to change their situation. I talk to people quite a bit who, like, just the other day I was, I don't know, I posted like some Facebook story or whatever. Somebody's like, oh, you're living the life, you're here, you're there. And it's like, okay, yeah, like, I mean, I'm blessed in very many ways, but, like, you could do that too. And there's like, it's almost as though they don't believe that. And for them to believe that they could would be like threatening to them almost. It's almost as though they would have to then think, oh, hey, I'm not living up to my potential. And so what they do instead is they kind of backwards rationalize. They're like, oh, I'm happy. I'm happy. The truth is that, if they were really totally satisfied and everything, then they wouldn't be sitting there saying these things to me. Right. So I think that they do aspire to more, but it's kind of, they'd like to create this distance where they can say, okay, well, that's just, those people are lucky. I'm not one of those people. I can't have that. And maybe it's that when you're coming from a lower base level, it's easier to see that progress. And so you get into this conditioning of believing that you can change your life, right? Like, one of the things that I always say about kind of any sort of personal development, whether it's, people who get involved in trying to improve their dating life, whether it's people who are, go to the gym and start working on their health, or people who pursue entrepreneurship or whatever, is the cool thing is you get this kind of virtuous cycle where you experience, hey, I did something different and I was rewarded for it. Look, I have the personal power to change my behavior and my thinking. And by changing my behavior and my thinking, I can affect the outcomes of my life. And I can start, if I can do that in my health, I can probably do it in my relationships. I can probably do it in my business and my finance and so on and so forth. And I don't know if it's, I'm sure that lack of belief affects people in a lot of places, but I feel as though it's easier to see the progress if you're, like I said, coming from kind of a lower baseline, because like to go from, I don't know, making 300 euros a month to making 600 euros a month is a huge difference in your quality of life. Whereas to go from, I don't know, pick some number, 3,000 to 6,000 is not as much of a jump, but it's much harder, jump to make, right? And so, kind of that incremental difference is, I don't know. It's what do you think? What do you think? I'm just kind of spitballing
I think one
random
of the things that
brainstorms here. So I'd love
I've
to know
seen,
what do you think?
one of the things I've seen
Hmm.
is just people's mindset around incentives. Like
Okay.
they can't do something without getting compensated right away for it. So that's why you get like a lot of
Yeah, yeah.
people, right, that are just, oh, I'm not going to do it unless you pay me, right? And so then say, okay,
100%.
well,
100%.
I'm definitely going to pay you, but it's just going to be market value for what this task is going to be worth. And if that's your whole attitude about doing that,
Yep.
you're not going to develop any new skills or
Yep.
abilities that long term are going to benefit you. And it also goes to
Yeah.
expectations,
Yeah.
right?
That's a very good point.
In terms of, oh, people just want to work 9 to 5, and then like on their weekends they don't want to do anything, and they just want to like,
Yeah.
I guess they want to own their time and make a statement by not doing anything work related, in a way.
Yeah. Yeah.
That makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah.
Where like a lot of
Totally.
people that
Totally.
where a lot of people I know that are like
Yeah.
entrepreneurs that like run their own business, they're working all the time, but they can make time to do things that they need to. They can make time to go to the doctor. They can make time to go for a
Totally.
run sometimes whenever they need it. But their whole motivation and their whole aspiration is to make this business or this opportunity as successful as it can all the time. So that it's always on their mind,
Yeah.
and they're always doing something towards it. So if it's even reading a book that makes them a better manager or makes them a better investor or makes them a better speaker, that adds some type of tangible
Yep.
value, to their skill set,
Yep.
it just compounds.
Yep.
Where a lot of people, they don't want to do anything unless it's paid for. I'm not going to do anything unless it's paid training. Why am I going to do something if I'm not getting paid for
Yep.
it? So I think that's one of the biggest things. And then also a second
Yep.
thing that I've just seen through my own lens is people don't want to live below other people's standards. So
Oh, tell me more about that one.
like for example, like if you're not doing well, it's okay. Like, for example, if you're like going to college and working part-time, you don't need to buy brand new clothes, right? Like there's nothing wrong with going and buying like secondhand clothes or whatnot, but it's like this expectation that
Totally.
I'm too good to buy used clothes, or that's below me, and whatnot. And they're just, instead of doing
Yeah.
that, they're just like, rack up a few $100s buying brand new clothes that they can't afford, but they don't want to feel below anyone else.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like some of that stuff that
It
I see
makes
a lot.
Yeah, it's kind of like a delayed gratification thing. It reminds me of two cool things. One was, I remember when they announced the Tesla Model 3, a friend of mine said, and I think it was very true. It turned out to be way more true. He's like, hey, listen, instead of going and buying the Model 3, go and buy Tesla stock, and in a few years you'll be able to buy 10 Teslas. And lo and behold, it's up 5x just this year or something, right? So it's an example of where the person, oh no, I have to have it now, right? It's like, well, maybe instead of having it now, you should take that money and you should invest it, and it can be worth a lot more in the future. Another thing, kind of what you were saying, a very good friend of mine who's done very well. He's consistently very, very successful. And he wrote a blog post years ago. I thought it was very insightful. He's like, it was answering the question, or his ideas of the question around why is it that people don't become more successful, and in particular financially successful or successful in business. And he's like, I think there's two reasons. One is they just don't want it badly enough. The second, though, is more interesting. He's like, people are used to linear effort for linear results. And so, for instance, you go to the gym, you work out a little, you get a little result. You work out a lot, you get a lot of result. People are used to that sort of thing. Hey, I put in an hour, I make $20. I put in 2 hours, I make $40. I put in 5 hours, I make $100. But in business, you have to be willing to put in a massive amount of time and get no result. And that takes a lot of people out psychologically. That is like brutal for them. And the truth is, you could go through and you could try many, many things. I remember when I was first testing, or not first testing, but when I come back to Facebook advertising, and I was running these ads, and I would try all these different things, and I was getting the same or worse results, and it was super frustrating. I'm just like, what can I do? Why am I not? I figured that my cost per click should be 1/4 of what I was paying for it. I was paying a little over $1 a click, and I'm like, what's going on here? How do I change this? I feel like I'm following it. And I would test different headlines. I would test different images. I would test a bunch of stuff. No results. And yeah, it's very demotivating, right? It's very the psychological game of success is really tough. How is it that you how did you get into the mindset of doing things like this, YouTube, being entrepreneurial, being into all this kind of stuff?
Well, one, I've just been super curious, but I think one of the biggest things just growing up, I was never really given anything from my parents just because they were, you know, they were immigrants, and kind of growing up was not really anything was provided for you. So it just gave me
Yeah,
a motivation instinctively. Just if I wanted something or I want to achieve something, I'm gonna have to go and do it. And over time, just with different opportunities and different things that I've done, I've just learned
yeah,
that if you want to get good at something, it just takes a lot of time. And one of the things that
yeah,
have really helped me out in conceptualizing that is reading a lot of different biographies and listen to people's actual stories. No matter who they are,
yeah,
in terms of anyone that's at a very, very high level, they have spent so
yeah,
much time that it's mind numbing. And people just kind of
yeah,
they discount that, and they just say, hey, they're lucky because they're in that position, or they're lucky that they're in the right place at the right time. But outside of the luck, or
yeah,
outside of the timing of the accomplishment, they've just put in a lot of time. And regardless of what you
yeah.
do,
What
like,
is what?
go ahead.
Go ahead. I was just going to ask if there was some particular biographies that really stuck out to you that were really amazing.
So what I like the Arnold Schwarzenegger one. Total
Okay.
Recall is
Yeah.
a really good one. The Elon Musk
Yeah.
is a really good one.
Yeah.
There's
That's good
one
one.
by David Gaffin, if you know who he is. He's like the record label owner, Gaffin Records.
Okay. Yeah. Yep.
Let me see
Yeah.
if I have it here. Yeah, this is an amazing book. An amazing book. The Operator,
Nice.
David Gaffin.
Yep.
I'll give you a quick gist about it. It's just he was this super broke Jewish kid, right? That
Yep.
had no connections. His parents are both struggling, and he just was an usher at this church and met somebody at the record label, and he
Yep.
started off just in the mailroom, and
Yeah.
just working his way up, and just understanding the business outside of the mail room, and slowly connecting with all the different individuals in that organization, and just
Yep.
befriending them, and just slowly
Yep.
just getting to know more about the business. He was thrown an
Yep.
opportunity to become one of those guys that goes and find talent, and he got so
Yep.
good at doing that that he just found really good
Yep.
talent.
Nice. Very nice. I love some of these stories. They're great. One of the things that I tend to find about it is yeah, these people have a lot of consistency a lot, because it's so easy to get up and do something, you know, for one day, for 1 week, for 1 month, but showing up day after day and just bringing it and doing your best and continually iterating is yeah, it's really, really tough. And I respect a lot people who have come through the ranks. I feel as though a lot of people, they're not willing to pay the price. One of the things that I changed every year, and at the end of the year, I try and do a review of the year, and I try and kind of set new goals, etc. And For a long time, I would find myself setting these goals, then I would review, and I wouldn't achieve it. And one of the things that helped to improve quite a bit was I changed my goal setting process to include what is the price that I'm going to have to pay in order to get to that goal, and resolving in advance to pay the price. I feel like that gets in the way of a lot of people. If you kind of know, you're like, hey, listen, in order to get here, I'm going to have to put in, 40 hours a week for the next 5 years. I'm going to have to be willing to go and network and expand my network of people. I'm going to have to put in the time to developing these skills. I'm going to have to, whatever those different things are. But when you kind of resolve, when you have acknowledged in advance, hey, here's the price, I'm willing to pay the price, I'm just going to do it, I find that you might not necessarily get exactly there, but you're just much more likely to go through what it takes. And at least for me, I got much better results being that way.
I think also two things that I've learned that are like super important is I think a lot of people they get mental blocks because they think they're being judged by other people.
Oh yeah,
And it's always negative judgment. They always assume the worst of how people are
yeah,
going to critique them in terms of whatever they're
yeah.
going to do. In terms of you know, they think I'll probably not be able to do it, or they're going to think this video sucks or whatnot. But that's
Yeah,
kind of like your
yeah.
own mechanism for kind of not wanting to go through the hardships of it. And I think when you're able
Have
to,
you heard that expression? It's like when you're 20, you're concerned about what people think. When you're 40, you don't give a shit what people think. When you're 60, you realize they weren't thinking about you anyway.
yeah, and that's the real thing. Like for some reason, like we've all just been exposed to, I guess it could be just school or like how we are as a society, but we tend to not want to do our best because we're scared to be made fun of, or we're scared to be made a label of a
Yeah,
try hard. Like I remember being in
yeah.
being in school, and it wasn't cool to try.
Horrible. Horrible. And that's the thing that I'm talking about with this culture, right? Like when you have a culture that makes it bad to perform well, makes it bad to succeed, makes it like, what a horrible thing, you know? Like we should be praising that kind of stuff. We should be praising the person who is giving it their all, who's making the sacrifices, who is willing to step outside of their comfort zone, etc. And yeah, yeah, it's not the norm.
So I wanted to ask you, Michael, if like what's your ideal client that would come to you and say, hey, like this is what I need to do with my company or my personal residency? Like, what's the ideal guy or girl for you?
Well, so most of the people who we work with are online entrepreneurs. So, whether they have, Amazon stores or Shopify stores, or they're doing affiliate marketing, or, they have some sort of an online business. So that's pretty typical. It doesn't intrinsically have to be that. I was talking to a guy earlier today who had a medical company that he sold. I have another guy I was talking to, whatever it was, this past week, who has like 40 McDonald's franchises or whatever. So there's all different types of people who could be in there. But the most common one is people who have online businesses of some sort. So it makes them location independent. It makes it much easier to work with. And then they're probably earning enough income that their tax bill is pretty high. So usually that means like 500 grand and above, I would say, is kind of the range that you start having it make sense in order to engage in some kind of restructuring of your business. That are usually, people are coming to us because they want to pay lower tax. They're basically like, how do you pay as close to zero tax as possible legally, right? And so yeah, those types of people I would say are optimal. And then it helps even more if they're willing to be location independent, but not necessarily. We have lots of clients who they want to stay in Australia, they want to stay in Canada, they want to stay in the US, they want to stay in wherever. So yeah, I would say some sort of location independent business that is earning like at least somewhere around $500,000 a year or more.
And what's the best way for someone to get a hold of you?
First of all, they should definitely check out our YouTube channel, which is Offshore Citizen. I try and put out like a video every day now, so lots of great information. But then they can go and they can either do one of two things. So we have offshorecitizen.net or offshorecapitalist.com. They can go check out, or they can book calls with me on. I have this site clarity.fm /Michael Rosmer, and people can book calls with me there. And so that's that's also something that they can do if they'd like to reach out.
And what I'll do as well is I'll put like all that the description below in the video when they watch it. So all the information will be in the description.
Cool. Yeah, appreciate it.
Likewise. So yeah, so thank you very much
definitely.
for coming on. It was an amazing conversation. A lot of good insights from all ranges of topics. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, me too. We'll have to do it again in the future.
All right. Sounds good. Thanks again, Michael.
Awesome. Yeah, talk soon.
All right, guys. Thank you again for watching another episode. Make sure you subscribe, hit the notification bell, because again, we have videos every week and they get better and better. So don't miss out.